By far the most common types of questions I get on this channel are very specific shoe recommendations for very specific needs, and it's impossible to do a video for every sort of combination. That's where this video series comes into play. If you've watched these in the past, you'll know that in this video, you can take shoes from every category that matches up with your foot, game style, injury, or player profile, and find the shoe that matches in each category, or most of them, and are able to find what would be my favorite shoes for those specific needs. It's really just as easy as connecting the dots. So say you're somebody with a narrow foot and a high arch, you play guard, and you're an ankle sprainer. Just find the shoe in each category, or the one that fits most categories. That's pretty much gonna be the shoe that I would probably say is my favorite. Now, I also have a companion to this in the description below that is the 2024, going into 2025 basketball shoe guide, and that's where all the stats on my channel live. That's how you can sort the shoe by whatever you want, weight, width, anything like that, bounce height. Well, that way you can compare my 2024 guide to this video in written form. All right, let's get into it with number one, foot type. And of course, I always start these videos off with wide feet because that's the most common question I get. But remember, when you're looking at a shoe, you can't just look at its width at the metatarsals or at the toes or whatever. You also have to look at its inflare, because if you're a very pancaked wide foot, somebody with bunions, or specifically tailor's bunions on the outside of your foot, the inflare of a shoe could really create some problems. So you gotta look for also a shoe that does not have too crazy of an inflare. My favorite currently are now the New Balance basketball line again, because they're starting to make their shoes in widths again. They're starting to make them in 2Es again. So if you can get a shoe in a 2E, that is gonna be pretty darn good. Also, that Skechers XKX Float is also a very high volume shoe. And as always, the Adidas Harden line usually is pretty accommodating, although I have heard some people have issues with those EVA arches around their ankles, but not necessarily in the meat of their foot where it's the widest. And remember, that wide foot category does, like I said, encase bunions and tailor's bunions. However, I will say my favorite shoes for bunions and tailor's bunions right now, honestly, really anything with expandable uppers, like the Under Armour Flow Future X Elite, even though it isn't the most wide shoe on the planet, and its break-in is so buttery. That's one of the ones where, like, the Skechers XKX Float also really expandable for bunions, and like I said, anything in a 2E and a 4E, that's right where that width starts to come into play. So for bunions and tailor's bunions, kind of in the wide foot category as well. Like I said, just look for a shoe with not too crazy of an inflare. And conversely, if you're a narrow-footed player and you don't have really long toes, that's great, because you can just usually go down a half size, get the volume of the shoe a little bit smaller. Now, shoes that just come naturally a little bit narrow, the Nike Sabrina 1, the Rigor AR1, those are kind of two of my favorites because the shape of those shoes, especially the Sabrina one, because that shoe's materials in the uppers are so premium, it does actually, it fits more medium foot types too, but it also cinches down around a more narrow foot. Remember, if you're a male player with a narrow foot, you can always try to go with the female last, because those are just gonna be a tad more narrow for you. Conversely, if you're a female with a wide foot, you can always go for the male standard size, and that can usually bump you up. So that's another easy way to fit a lot more shoes into that category without having to look at specifically wide and narrow lasted shoes. But if you've had your foot measured and you're just a more true width, right, you just fall right in the middle of that bell curve, then you've got a pretty long list. You can see on the side here, this list is pretty long. And these are most shoes I found that just fit pretty true to a medium foot. They might be a little bit longer of a break-in for a very wide foot, and for a narrow foot, as long as you're getting a snug tie down, they should be okay too. And if you're someone like me with a very high arched foot, probably a very heavy strike when you come down on the ground, people can always tell you're coming from a mile away. You really want a shoe that has good protection in the heel as well as the forefoot. Once again, like Curry shoes, with the flow foam are really nice for that as long as you fit the other profiles of them. But honestly, right now, it's the New Balance Fresh Foam BBV2 with that Fresh Foam X Foam, and just how they have the shank aligned in there is just, honestly, it doesn't get much better. I didn't think it was going to get much better than the 361 AG4, and the Fresh Foam BBV2 comes out, and so you got two really good options there for high arch feet. Those are the best. And if you're somebody with more of a pancake flat foot, now some people have pain with that, with arch strain, pain, tendinitis, which we'll get to later in the video. Other people don't. They just have flat feet and no pain with them. Everybody's different. Now, to me, somebody with a flatter foot needs, number one, a lot of support in the shoe. Same thing like you'd want in a high arched foot shoe. I've said this in a lot of videos, that the best shoes for high arched feet, a lot of them are also good for flat arched feet. There's a lot of crossover there, not all, but some. To me, right now, still one of the best shoes for flat feet is the Way of Wade All City 12, the Way of Wade 10. That line, the 1011 line, is also fantastic. Really anything with a more resilient foam and a shank that has good contact with the foot is going to give the best base flat foot. Also, shoes that can accept an orthotic, which we'll get to later in the video, are also all very good shoes for flat feet. And like I was just talking about, a lot of times the best shoes for a flat or high arched foot are also just the shoes that can fit orthotics and braces the best. Now, obviously, the New Balance Fresh Foam BB V2 I like a lot. Really anything with more of a mid-top construction is going to be able to lock down a little bit better over a more bulky orthotic. I kind of found the LeBron 21s to have a really nice break-in profile to them when you're augmenting those shoes. The uppers of them just kind of have a nice expansion profile when it comes to a brace or an orthotic. So I do like those a lot for those, but also, like I said, really anything in that mid-top range, really anything where you see on my videos where that heel slippage dial is down into the mild to none region. Now that we're done talking all about your foot shape, let's get into number 2, game style. And this first category was actually a request from a subscriber. If you do have requests for, different categories in this video, make sure you leave them as a comment down below. I do look at them, and if it is kind of fitting with the video, I will put it in. This next category is the best basketball shoes for 2-a-days or multiple games. Now, to me, these are a lot of the same shoes that are good for a high arched player because they're just very resilient to the foot, right? You got to get in and out of the shoe pretty easily. You want a shoe that, after you play once, does it feel just a little bit cramped? Does it feel a little bit bogged down, right? So you want a shoe that is pretty lively, but also just you're not dreading getting back on. And if you are the big on your team, you're a center, you just play a lot in the paint, you just do a lot of combat in and around the rim. The AG4 and the AG4 Soar to me still are some of the most ideal shoes for that type of position, but also, like a lot in this video, the Fresh Foam BB V2 has really come a long way, kind of into almost that like number 2 or number 1.5 slot for sure. But if you're the exact opposite and you need a shoe for a lot of fancy footwork, you just really pride yourself on creating space for yourself, or just really need a shoe that you can get very low to the ground, very gripping with, just give you the ultimate degrees of freedom. Honestly, the Way of Wade 808 Ultra, no. The Way of Wade 8083 Ultra V2, the high top elastic version of it, honestly to me it doesn't to me play like a drop-in. I know it is a drop-in shoe, but to me, it has the best characteristics of a traditional shoe plus the best characteristics of more the flexibility of a drop-in. It's kind of, it's one of the most rugged shoes for that type of position. Every other shoe on this list is good. I do have the Nike GT Cut Academy and then GT Cut 3 on here. The Academy to me is a little bit better of a shoe in terms of protection, but if you are a more advanced player and your footwork is good and you're not laterally unstable, then you're gonna hear a lot of people say they like the GT Cut 3 for these types of positions, and that's why I put this in, because for a more advanced player, a more advanced shoe, I would say though, if you've got any sort of issues with instability or your footwork isn't really high level, then for that player, I'd probably drop this off the list. Now, if you're someone that plays more in the forward position, I know I've had people tell me that, basketball is becoming more of a positionless sport. I hear you, but there are still pretty defined, footwork and game styles for these positions. So if you are someone that's more bullying your way to the rim, right, you're going a lot north to south on the court, the AG4, like I said, still a fantastic shoe. The Fresh Foam BB V2, still a fantastic shoe. I kind of found the Kawhi 4 to really fit that profile very, very nice because of the protection, also the speed of it, just really kind of fit in that category to where if you don't want to wear a bulkier shoe, it's got the trappings of the bulkier shoes, but it has the quickness, more of those speed-focused shoes. And if you are trying to get up into the air over and over and over again, especially trying to get rebounds, number one, you're going to need a shoe that is easy to pop off the ground, but also a shoe that is not going to send a ton of shock up your legs. That's why I keep saying this, but I also was very high up on the AG4 because the protection when you came back down. Now, the Fresh Foam BB V2 has obviously come up in that list in terms of protection coming back down. It's still not the most bouncy shoe out there for sure. The Kawhi 4 has really come up with that energy arc in there. And the way they use the fuel cell in that shoe I thought was really great. Also, really any shoe in the Curry Flow line with that shank that goes more distal into the forefoot. For shoes that aren't the heaviest and aren't the bulkiest, don't have the craziest setup. It's pretty simple setup right in the midsole. those things do give a ton of spring back and that flow foam. It does have that really nice balance of shock absorption as well as some energy return. Gotta make sure that you're protected coming down as much as going back up, because if you're destroying your body coming back down, it's not going to want to lift back up. But like I mentioned before, if you do most of your work in terms of a ground assault, you're trying to create space for yourself and you're trying to make very hard cuts, you need a shoe that, number one, you can actually feel the court with, right? So your body knows where you are in space. But number two, has enough containment in it that you're not going to pop through the shoe. So, you know, to me, the Way of Wade All City 12 still really is the best out there for this, just because of how the shoe sits on the ground, more that flat tread profile. You know, the midsole geometry of it, just really everything about that shoe is meant to contain. That's why it's such a good pickleball and tennis shoe as well. But like I said, there are some shoes out there that don't look like they've got a ton of support in the uppers, but because most of the stability in a shoe comes from its mid and outsole, you can get a shoe like the Kai one from Anta that still has tremendous containment, but you can also feel the court really well. But if you're really trying to impress a coach or just anybody else watching in the stands with speed, trying to get north to south on the court, coast to coast, right now the Leaning Gamma, the Nike GT Cut 3, and the New Balance Kawhi 4, to me, are the three fastest shoes out there. The one thing you got to watch out for on the Nike GT Cut 3 is, remember, there is no shank on there, so that is going to start to wear down versus the Leaning Gamma and the New Balance Kawhi 4, where that shoe is pretty darn protected, so the foam in it is going to stay pretty resilient, and just the structure of the shoe is going to stay resilient over time, versus the GT Cut 3, where yes, they are lightning quick shoes, and if you're a lighter player, you're a little bit lighter on your feet, you're not going to bottom that out as fast. But over time, the Leaning Gamma and the Kawhi 4 are, you know, kind of going to do this, and then the Nike GT Cut 3 is going to do this. And in terms of durability, honestly, you can't go wrong with Leaning or Way of Wade these days. I mean, they're just super durable. You know, the Dawn Issue 5 and the 6, you know, honestly, for a budget shoe that the Dawn Issue 5, you know, becomes a lot, I mean, you can get them for under $100 pretty regularly now. They're pretty darn durable for the price, so, you know, relative to price, those are pretty high up on the list. Now, if you can get a Jordan or a Nike in the EP or the PF family, that stands for Engineered Performance. If you can get those models that has the XDR rubber on them, that is going to be a lot more durable. That's more of like the Nike tennis rubber, which is pretty darn durable. It's not going to be as sticky on an indoor hardwood court, right? You're not going to get the tack that some of the Nike shoes can get on indoor courts, but you will get a lot more durability out of them. Sometimes those models are a little bit harder to find, but if you want those, you know, more durable shoes, you got to look for the EP or the PF next to the name. And speaking of that grip profile of those Nike shoes, you know, if you are someone that needs a shoe just for more nimble grip on a hardwood court, you're only playing on hardwood, you just want something that really interacts with those courts the best, I found the Leaning JB2, even though when I first saw them, I did have some questions, I found those to have some of the best grip ever on a hardwood court, just really interesting. But if you're someone like me who plays pretty much half and half indoor and outdoor, and you just want a shoe for both of them, you don't want to have to keep buying different shoes, honestly, to me, still the best shoe for that, Anta Shockwave 5. Even though it doesn't have the most, you know, crazy grip on those indoor hardwood courts, it's easy enough to clean and the grip is still very good on those indoor courts, but it also translates to outdoor courts. Also, the New Balance 2-Way V4 to me has enough protection, but enough like playability on both surfaces to do exceptionally well. I think a little better than the Fresh Foam BBV2. It also doesn't heat up as much as the Fresh Foam BBV2. Remember, if you're only playing on outdoor courts, then I would just, you know, get an outdoor focus shoe. I have a video on that I'll link in the description below. But if you're playing on both, you definitely want some characteristics of both so that, you know, you're not sacrificing completely on one surface for the other. And speaking of, if you do want, you know, a little bit more durability on outdoor courts, a lot of times a tennis shoe is a better option for you just because they're engineered for those types of courts, especially for the sheer, you know, the friction that comes through those shoes on playing a tennis court. So, you know, really, you know, the Coco CG1 is still a fantastic pickup, the A6 Court FF3, as well as the Case-West Hypercourt Supreme 2 I found was really kind of an outsized performer in terms of the movements on an outdoor basketball court. And with that being said, that brings us to the third category, and probably the one that, you know, I look at the most, and that is injuries, body type, and chronic conditions. And for sure, the most common complaint I get in my office, as well as in comments, is, you know, people get heel pain when they're playing. What is the best shoe for heel pain? You know, I wanted to say the Way of Wade All City 12. It's just that the Fresh Foam BBV2, I know I keep talking about the shoe, the Fresh Foam BBV2 doesn't have as much slippage in it, even though the Way of Wade All City 12 doesn't really have a lot of heel slippage. Now remember, there are a lot of different types of heel pain, right? There's plantar fasciitis, there's bursitis, there's Achilles tendonitis, there's Achilles peritendon, there's all sorts of types of heel pain. But like I said, they all have one thing in common: micro motion and a lot of micro tearing. So if you can get a shoe that is stable in the rear foot, typically they're all going to do a lot of the same things. Now, if you're somebody with Achilles pain that has a bump in the back, honestly, it depends on where that bump is to where what shoe is going to fit you best, because people have those bumps in different areas versus if it's calcific tendinosis versus if it's actual Haglund's deformity, which is an actual bump of the bone. Those can be in two completely different places. So if you do have a bump there, what I would probably do is take a picture of the side of your foot, find a picture of the side of the shoe, and see where the padding is, right? When you see the cutouts of the shoes that I do on this channel, you'll see where the padding is on the shoe. And if there's a lot of padding around that bump and things that can kind of brace that bump, that's where you want to look for it, right? So as long as it's in this list of shoes that really kind of harness that heel pretty well, that's just a matter of finding the padding or doing it yourself to make that bump more comfortable. And of course, the second most common, complaint I get is people spraining their ankles playing basketball. It's just so easy to do. Number one, the movements of basketball, but number two, trampling on people's feet really cause some issues no matter really what shoe you're wearing. Sometimes, like I was wearing that Skechers XKX float, and that thing was so bottom stable, it was really hard to roll on that one. So that one's a really good pickup, but there are just so many different ways to roll your ankle on a basketball court. Now, the best shoes for balance and containment, as we talked about before, a lot of those are very good for ankle sprainers too. I did narrow that list a little bit to like my favorite shoes for specifically lateral ankle sprain shoes that put you a little bit more on a different trajectory than that more inversion ankle sprain. And on the opposite side of your lateral ankle where you would sprain it, comes the medial side of your foot, right? Where you can get arch strain, arch pain, tendinitis, specifically posterior tibial tendinitis. I mean, you can sprain the inside of your ankle, and that is not fun. But in terms of more of that straining type issues, honestly, it took me a little while with the Way of Wade Fission 9 to kind of get a better feel for it, but that shoe's got a profile that is so nice with the double shank as well as kind of the double layer of foam in there. You get a little bit more of the shock absorbing foam over top of it, a little bit more resilient foam underneath of that. So to me, the Fission 9 still, from the Fission 8, I think is actually a little bit better than the Fission 9. But that Fission line from Way of Wade is really a great shoe at resisting a lot of those torsional forces, right? A lot of those just pummeling forces that come down through your leg to create a lot of those arch strain, arch pain, tendinitis type issues. And the best basketball shoes for ball of foot pain list, this includes Morton's Neuroma, metatarsalgia, hallux limitus rigidus, that's arthritis in your big toe joint or arthritis in any of your other toe joints, really anything in that ball of foot region. Remember, you just need a shoe that's not super constricting. You also need a shoe that has protection under the ball of your foot so you're not pummeling through the ground, and a little bit more of a forgiving foam. I think the New Balance Fresh Foam BBV2 is absolutely fantastic. If you're somebody with more of like specific arthritis in your big toe joint, you want to look for a shoe that has a shank that dives deep underneath of the forefoot that has foam over top of it, right? So like the Curry Flow line, to me, is one of the best ones as long as you fit the other profile of it, right? As long as you're not a super wide foot in terms of the Curry Flow 11 or the Spawn Flowtro. But the Flow Future X Elite, you can break it a little bit better, like I said, for a wide footer. So it comes down to the shank and foam profile, but also a shoe that's not going to taper super hard into the forefoot. And in terms of shin splints, shin splints to me are some of the hardest issues to deal with because so many things can set them off, and sometimes it doesn't matter the shoe. Sometimes you just need a compressive device, you just need a icing regimen. Sometimes, I've been with a doctor that did more fasciotomies than anybody out there, and I was doing fasciotomies almost every week on people with chronic exertional compartment syndrome, which is that more, chronic shin splint type issue. And so sometimes there's nothing you can do besides getting it taken care of. But I will say, in terms of shoes, there are shoes that are much better and much worse. A shoe that feels like a brick underfoot, typically that means that there's a lot of shock coming up the leg. Once again, the Way of Wade Fission 9 with that super buttery light foam on the top and then the boom foam underneath of it plus the double shank, to me that really does protect against some of the more torsional issues with shin splints. It also, if you're a heavier player with a heavier strike, right? That's gonna, you know, create a lot more shock absorption in there. So a lot of the best shoes for ball of foot pain, a lot of the best shoes for high arches are also, you know, or arch strain are also good for shin splints. But like I said, if you are suffering from shin splints, I will say early treatment is best. Finding that treatment regimen that fits you is the best, because I'll tell you, shin splints, to me, no two are created equal, right? There's always these different treatment plans we have to get into with that. So I think that the best shoe recommendation I have for that is a very, very good sports medicine physician in your area. And if you're someone that suffers from pain a little bit higher up the chain, you know, knee, hip, back, neck pain, that is usually from too much shock coming up your leg, right? So same thing, New Balance Fresh Foam BBV2, you know, 361 AG4. Those are two, I mean, of the best shoes ever, I think, for those issues. Remember, also a shoe that can fit an orthotic is really good, because if you have orthotics that can kind of keep you, you know, it can kind of redistribute that pressure, redistribute that shock a little bit better. That's, you know, remember, anytime you exert a force on the ground is exerting an equal and opposite force up your leg. So that's why orthotics do so well with this, because they kind of redistribute all of those forces around you, just create a much more inviting environment, right, for your foot to come crashing down onto. So remember, best shoes for this, a lot of these we've seen throughout the video, but if you are someone that suffers from those issues, the shoe can make a huge difference in terms of how much shock is actually reaching those joints. And if you are a heavier player, especially if you're on an outdoor asphalt, cement, or concrete court, remember, you've got a lot more coming down on top of that shoe, so you can't be in a shoe that's going to crumble underneath of you. Conversely, if you are a lighter weight player, you don't want to be trying to lift an anvil with a rubber band, right? Like, you don't want to be wearing a super heavy, bulky shoe on foot that someone like Joel Embiid can play in, but you can't. So you just really going to want to match up, number one, the weight of the shoe, number two, how resilient that midsole foam is underfoot. If you're someone that's very heavy, like Joel Embiid with the Skechers XKX Float, in my review of those, I kind of showed those are not the most responsive shoes out there. But why would he care, right? He just wants stability, something that's going to accommodate his foot, game style, right body type. So for him, those are fantastic. Versus someone that weighs, I don't know, like 115 pounds, like I said, it's gonna be like trying to lift an anvil with a rubber band. And if you're someone looking for the most breathable shoes out there, right, you're really prone to athlete's foot or just hyperhidrosis, increased sweating, or, you know, just someone that really, you know, can stink up a shoe. Honestly, the Leaning Gamma is by far the best shoe out there. However, the Jordan 38, really, any of those Jordan, you know, signature shoes, right, coming from the 36, even up to the 37, 38, really have some open pores in those shoes, right? They breathe exceptionally well. Also, the Under Armour Flow Future X Elite had some really good breathability coming from the Spawn Flotro, which was one of the worst shoes for this, so that'd be probably the one to avoid. The Flow Future X Elite was one of the better ones in my opinion. So really, if you look at a shoe and it's got a lot of open poring in it, like the Leaning Gamma, like the Jordan 38, you're gonna get good breathability, right? So just, you know, just try not to get a shoe with a ton of, you know, blocked paneling on it, something that's gonna hold on to a lot of heat and moisture, because remember, your foot's gonna feel bogged down if, number one, it holds on to heat a lot, but also if it holds on to moisture. That's why I always do a heat test as well as the fog test to simulate heat and moisture. All right, well, that's the list, but if you do wanna see what shoes I thought cut through this list to become the top 5 shoes of this year so far, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the sneakerverse.